Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us for this webinar. We're looking forward to spending about 30 to 45 minutes together to discuss how to create a clear path to stronger security. Our goal today is simply to take the complicated topic of cybersecurity and simplify it by identifying the highest impact security investments for your organizations. We want to discuss the importance of not just deploying technical controls, but also operationalizing them. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's take a quick look at how we'll get started. First, I'll introduce you to the presentation team today and give a quick overview of MGT as an organization. This will give everyone an idea of who we are and how we assist our clients achieve their goals. Then we'll dive right into the presentation. We're going to focus our efforts on creating that clear path to security. Then we'll wrap up with the value of operationalization and review a few use cases where MGT's applied these concepts in practice. We do ask that you save all your questions for the collaboration and QA at the end. However, if you need to jot one down beforehand, please feel free to use our chat. It's actively being monitored throughout the presentation. Today's presentation team represents over 60 years of combined experience in cybersecurity. I'm Chris Laracy, a CISSP and certified incident handler and the principal solutions architect for MGT. With me today, both senior solutions architects and cybersecurity experts in their own rights. I have Nikhil Patak, who will present our use cases, and Andy Cubberly, who is the man with the answers and is monitoring the live chat and will lead our collaboration and QA at the end. In 2024, MGT celebrated our 50th anniversary as a company. That's over 50 years we've spent bringing experience, expertise, and knowledge to bear, providing impact to our clients and communities. Our core mission is being the social impact leader, specifically in the SLED space. But don't let that fool you. We also have many clients across the commercial, healthcare, financial, and manufacturing verticals. Our mission encompasses making positive impacts on society, defined by our impact. We're driven by our people. We focus on solving problems with your teams, and we're dedicated to the community by helping communities bring out the best in themselves. Everyone presenting today is a member of our Technology Solutions Group, a group which brings to the table a unique value proposition. Through offering our co-managed, fully managed, and our strategic solutions, we directly assist our customers in meeting their short and long-term goals. Our mission remains to provide solutions, achieving meaningful outcomes, and to impact communities for good. We do that through partnering with our clients to design and implement technology solutions that address their needs, whether that's in network infrastructure, cybersecurity, data center and cloud, unified communications, or physical security. We're always here to try and help solve problems. As you can see from this map, we have offices across the nation. We're a nationally recognized organization, but we've not lost our focus on our local clients. We strive to maintain a high level of client satisfaction, which is seen by our NPS scores. For anyone who isn't familiar with NPS or Net Promoter Scores, that just means how likely our clients are to recommend us and work with us again. We're a full service managed and professional services provider. We maintain partner relationships and internal expertise in what we feel are the major players and best in breed for each realm of technology solutions. We also participate in multiple cooperative agreements for purchasing, which allows us to contract fast without running a separate procurement mechanism with our clients. At our core, though, we're all problem solvers. So if you have an issue, whether you're an existing client or not, we ask that you bring it to your solutions architect or account management team so we can help you work on a solution. With that, let's see if we can simplify security and identify a clear path forward. We're going to start with where we think you should focus first. Recently, in one of our engagements, we had an IT director respond to us with this quote: "Our cybersecurity plan can always be strengthened. However, the real challenge lies in execution and operationalization." I hear this a lot across SLED, healthcare, commercial, OT clients. It never seems to be that there's not a shortage of framework or tools. The gaps we find are between those tools being deployed in the organization and operationalized. Today, We're looking to try and help identify where to begin closing that gap and how to ask the right questions that are going to determine your path forward as an organization. How many times have any of us looked at our environment in the last 12 months and thought we have most of the tools, we have most of them deployed, but are they actually working the way that they should? Those are the questions that we want to answer today. Setting the scene a little bit and why this matters now, we're seeing the public sector is one of the most targeted for vertical for ransomware. Education's at the bleeding edge of that. This isn't being sensational or editorializing on our standpoint. These are actually statistics provided by the FBI and CISA in their K-12 advisories. In just K-12, we've seen 9,300 incidents in the last 18 months with a $6.6 million median ransom. Federal funding is now even being tied to cyber attestation through the E-Rate cybersecurity pilot. The trend is the same across the board, whether you're K through 12, higher education, commercial, or healthcare. Costs are on the rise, the median dwell time is increasing, and the number of incidents we're dealing with day to day is increasing exponentially. In healthcare alone, ransomware attacks on US hospitals have nearly quadrupled since 2022, between 2022 and 2024. Commercial breaches hit a record cost of $4.8 million. And aviation alone, cyber attacks have jumped over 600% year over year. What I'm seeing today with my clients is something that as an industry we've been talking about for quite a while. Organizations are compliant on paper, but in practice, their policies, procedures, and controls aren't adequately protecting them. It's become painfully clear in some circumstances where we're seeing statistics as high as 258 days as a cross-sector median to identify and contain breaches. This is a systemic issue with cybersecurity. It's not an episodic one, and we feel it's tied to the over-complex nature of cybersecurity solutions. Leaves everyone a little bit stuck with trying to identify what is the highest impact starting point that really can move the needle for my organization in a meaningful and measurable way. I believe we can all agree that this is a very complex discussion to have. The number one issue facing most of the clients I talk about this with today is finding that solid entry point, a good place to start that provides that measurable improvement within the budget they've already been given. What we've done here is we've created a new quadrant view of cybersecurity that we're calling Security Simplified. We're using two axes, security impact and budget impact, to create 4 quadrants, each mapping controls to impact and cost. The headline and the core we're going to focus on today is the high impact, low cost, where almost every program we feel should begin. The goal we have is not to provide you with that direct path to cybersecurity. That's a way more complex conversation than just to try and represent on a Gartner style quadrant. The goal is to find that entry point by asking a simple question. Where do I get the highest impact security investment for the budget I actually have? Using the quadrant, we're going to try and answer that question and take the first step on the path to determining where that conversation with your solutions architect or account manager should lead, so that as a team, we can chart our course through the complex web of cybersecurity and find where that path leads to the most meaningful impact for your organization. Here we have the Security Simplified quadrant. The bottom right quadrant here is low impact, low cost, and this is table stakes at this point. Almost every client I've worked with in the past few years already has these. Firewall, backups, antivirus, help desk, you should have all of these already. And if not, we should be having a different conversation. Items like web application firewalls, we move over into the low impact, higher cost. These are costly. But with the rise of SaaS, we're seeing fewer clients with actual requirements for them. Also, just having a web application firewall without properly operationalizing it through tuning and properly identifying the web applications to hide behind it keeps this as an insufficient control. Next, we see the upper left quadrant. These items bring high impact, but they often come with an associated high price. Network access control, for example, brings immense value at the granular level of security, but it has to be properly maintained, tuned, and monitored to be fully effective. And finally, we land in our golden quadrant, the upper right. This is the area where we will find the most bang for our buck. These are typically the best starting points to identify and close the real gaps that are affecting organizations. Some of these should also be table stakes at this point. Multi-factor authentication. It's a core security function in any organization that is needed to protect identity and confidentiality. Three of the most critical items on this list, in particular, are tabletop exercises. This is a real world stress test for the organization. It maps how we make strategic decisions, what controls we have in place, and how well we're monitoring and using those controls. It helps develop strategic thinking, decision maps, and identifies the required escalations, as well as training and disseminating the roles and responsibilities of incident response across the organization. Tabletop exercises provide real strategic operational gaps that need closing in any organization and should regularly be conducted by organizations seeking to have a mature security program. We always say security is a life cycle, and tabletops are one of the methods for improving from one cycle to the next. Manage SOC. I've had clients purchase SIM and SOAR tools and never look at them or tune them. They just point the logs and assume that because they have it, it's going to do what it's supposed to do. Converting a SIM or SOAR to a managed SOC means that someone's actually looking at these events, incidents, and alerts and tuning out your false positives and trying to get you actionable information. The initial triage and investigational to get that actionable information back in the hands of operators is where the true value of these tools come in play. Immutable backups. One thing we've learned throughout the years, ransomware doesn't care about your backup, and your backup doesn't exist if it's not immutable. If an attacker can encrypt or delete your backups, then you don't really have them. If anyone here has been a victim of ransomware or followed any of the recent breaches, you should see the clear value of immutable backups, which is a write once, read many version of backups, allowing you to recover from ransomware without the risk of reinfection. As we'll see next, this makes the assumption that you're properly operationalizing these tools and testing the actual restore process. These are just a few of the high value items that are solid starting points in this conversation to determine the best path forward. The 9 items on this slide represent that upper right quadrant. We've talked about 3 of them already. Let's take a brief review of the remaining 7. If your program doesn't have all of these are a good conversation starting point with your account team. Multi-factor authentication is one of the single biggest controls by attack surface reduction and should be on every account that touches anything important, even service accounts if you can support that. Managed SOC, again, nobody staffs a 24/7 SOC in-house unless they have to. Co-managed and fully managed are how this typically is affordable for most organizations. Email security. Phishing is how most attackers still get in today. Next generation email security is the difference between a phishing test we can all laugh about later and how silly it was, and a breach to explain to the upper management or the board. On the heels of things like our recent Instructure Canvas breach that we've all witnessed, we see more of this, and we're going to see that it's becoming better than it's ever been because the data that a lot of these organizations are exfiltrating are now just to facilitate the next attack. Now I'll be able to craft actual phishing emails that have real tie-ins to actual conversations on the inside of my organization. EDR, which is an endpoint detection and response, specifically managed EDR with SOAR automations like one-click quarantine. Without the managed component, EDR is just the tool. Once we add that layered in management component, that's when we start moving EDR from a tool to a control that is a value to our organization. Maturity assessments provide us a baseline. Without a baseline, we can't prioritize improvement because we haven't been measured at where we are today. A maturity assessment is typically the report that you need to design your next 12 to 18 months of where you're going as a security organization. Patch management should always be ongoing. Again, security is a life cycle. Taking an annual look at patch management and vulnerability management isn't sufficient to protect our organization as our applications move and change, as our needs move and change, and as our world and threat landscape move and change. Security awareness training needs to be role-based with simulations. We need to make sure we're training people where they are from a knowledge level and where they are from a job responsibilities level. Quick example on a previous tabletop exercise I conducted with a K through 12 organization. We simulated a cascading failure, which ultimately resulted in an internet outage. Throughout this process, most of their incident response procedures and policies were being followed well, and they were performing wonderfully until we realized when we discussed with their transportation team, they wouldn't be able to actually fuel buses to pick students up or drop them off without the internet. And no one had planned a mitigation for that. Through the tabletop exercise, they were able to plan that mitigation and get it in place before they actually suffered a real disruption that caused harm to the organization. When we discuss these controls and tools, saying that they're deployed is not the same as them being operationalized. It's the most important distinction that we're going to discuss today. Deploying things provides us paper compliance. It says, yes, we have the control, it's fully installed and it's running. But if I ask, when was the last time it was tuned? When was the last time a playbook or run book for it was reviewed or created? When was the last time we tested or verified our backups? The answer I usually get back is either it's been quite a while or we've never done that. Operationalization is taking that strategic view of security and ensuring that not only do we have those controls present, but we're actively using them and we're using them to drive the increase in our security posture for the entire organization. That means these tools need to be tuned, they need to be tested, they need to be managed, and they need to be reviewed. The hard truth is most organizations deploy their tools across the board, but they don't typically operationalize all of them. It's not a failure of intent, it's a failure of the time my staff can spend, the amount of staff that I have, or the number of tasks I'm having to assign my staff to that don't relate directly to increasing the security posture. Once an organization makes that leap, though, from deployed to operationalized, that's where we start to see major improvements in the overall maturity of the organization. Under stress, it performs better. The decisions become clearer and the escalations become more straightforward. The effectiveness of their controls accelerate as we tune out false positives, as we're able to automate activities through the SOAR, and as our run books and playbooks are tuned to the actual needs of the organization and the actual processes that work time after time. What this leads to is actually controlling the business processes and business outcomes that not only do IT care about, but the entire organization relies on to keep running. For instance, many of our clients have seen their time to isolating endpoints that have been compromised drastically decrease once they are able to manage their SOCs. Specifically with us, we're able to identify the workflow that's needed to take a alert on an endpoint, determine if it is an actual security risk, and then get all the way to the point where we can either automate or one-click automate the isolation of that endpoint, which allows us to monitor throughout the identification to the remediation action what has been done to that endpoint in a very quick time frame. This is operationalization in action. It creates real measurable improvements to our clients. Returning to our quadrant, we're going to apply a little modification to it here where we show how these things actually adjust when we move from just deployed to operationalized. What you see here are the highlighted changes and where the impact, typically the security impact, actually goes up for most of these organizations and most of when they actually operationalize these controls. The highlighted cells show that improvement. What this what this lets you do in the next account team conversation is point at a single tile, a single control here and say, I have this one, it's deployed, but I haven't yet operationalized it, and that's where I'm looking for help. It's one of the most important ways for us to start this conversation together and have a common ground and common language as we talk. The win here is to get each of your deployed controls highlighted. That's the roadmap we're promoting. Let's find what you don't have that you could use from a tooling perspective and make sure that the tools you do have are being properly operationalized and used by your organization so that you can get the full value out of the investments you've already made. The quadrant tells us where to focus. The checklist starts working on how do we move. This is where we have it broken into 3 NIST adjacent categories: prepare, detect, and recover. Each one contains two columns: deployed and operationalized. The goal is to get you a starting point to start that conversation with your MGT sales architect or account manager. It's going to help us develop a custom path forward with achievable goals for your organization. Now we're going to get into each one of these sections. When we talk about prepare, this is everything we're trying to do before an incident happens. We want to look at maturity assessments and governance so that we can articulate where we are, because if we can't say where we're at, then we can't figure out where we need to be. This is a baseline document that everything else here hangs off of. We're in the AI era now, so we're talking about not just standard computer acceptable use or network acceptable use. Now we have to worry about AI acceptable use. Shadow AI is the new shadow IT everyone's dealing with, and the data exposure that we're seeing in the wild is a real impact to most organizations. Looking at risk identification and prioritization as a living risk register and not just a static point in time is a new way to actually determine what risks do we have, what have we shifted to the cloud, and what are we maintaining, and what is being done with our data as it migrates between our private cloud, a SaaS solution, and back to us. Access control and MFA. Already we've discussed that this is kind of foundational, but we're asking not only do we have MFA, have we worked it into all of our workflows? Have we created any exceptions or exemptions that we should reevaluate? Have we made sure that all of our sensitive information is protected, not just by a username and password, but also multi-factor authentication or passkeys? Moving beyond standard SIM and SOC to actual automated SOAR response. Again, we're going to see a similar action on the detect side, or yeah, on the detect slide. But here we're asking, have we taken the first steps to identify the run books and playbooks, the actual items that we want to automate with the SOAR? Have we identified what those workflows look like? Because if we don't know what the workflows look like, we can't automate them and make sure that they fire appropriately. A city I worked with last year had a lot of these things deployed, but when we actually went and looked to see how they were using them and operationalizing them, we found out that the maturity assessment that they had completed, they thought they had completed recently, was actually 18 months outdated. The AI acceptable use policy was only a stub policy saying that they didn't allow AI use. And the risk register hadn't actually been touched in a couple of years since their previous CISO had actually left. The same tool list that they had checked on the deployed side, but they couldn't actually check any of the items on the operationalized side. When we get into detect, this is where we're trying to determine how do we actually detect that an incident happened so that we can respond to it. So if we can't detect it and we can't respond to it, then we certainly can't recover from it. You need a 24/7, 365 SOC. You've got to have someone looking at the alerts and the events as they come in and turning those into actionable incidents. We always see a huge number of alerts that come in, but they have to be filtered down into manageable incidents that are actually valuable to the organization. Vulnerability management. Again, similar to how we discussed patch management before, this needs to be a life cycle. We need to be continuously refining and identifying the vulnerabilities that are in our environment and patching them. Saying we ran a scan last February isn't enough in today's world. We need to make sure that this is ongoing from a scanning, remediation, and reporting standpoint. Network and endpoint visibility. The shorthand here really is that the SOC needs to be able to see the things that you care about. You need to know what's happening on the network and what's happening on the endpoints. And that needs to be centralized in a single location. We shouldn't have to call 3 different teams to figure out what's happening when an incident occurs. Alert tuning and triage. This is where a lot of deployed SIMs in the wild actually fail. Tuning isn't just that first 30 or 60, 90 days. That is important, but we need to continuously tune as we see the alerts coming in. And we need to build as the environment changes to make sure that triage, SLAs are all written, owned, and met. Automated SOAR response. What we're talking about here, this isn't do we have SOAR? This is how are we actually doing at taking those playbooks and firing them off in a repeatable and consistent pattern, and which workflows can we actually move to a more automated state to free up the human hours that we have to actually do the in-depth SOC analysis and determine the next steps forward in our program to continue to move it up the maturity level. When we're talking about threat intelligence integration, we need to be able to provide context to our detection. Without the context, we're not able to leverage lessons that are being learned painfully by other organizations that research agencies are putting in. We need to figure out, how does this look in practice for us? Here at MGT, we take all of that information in through our SIM and SOAR. We pull that integration in and we use that to enrich the actionable alerts that we return to our clients. A large K-12 of ours that we'll talk about later suffered a breach several years ago. They met with us and we subsequently helped them build out a SIM solution with managed SOC and SOAR. They now generate about 35,000 events per second passing through our tune and triage system. We're able to maintain 13 months of retention for them and provide one-click quarantine for their affected endpoints, along with some other automations. This really kind of shows what a fully operationalized detect lifecycle looks like for a K through 12. Recover is typically the last step when we're talking about a security breach or security incident. This is what saves the day when the worst thing happens, and it's also the area most organizations underinvest in, whether it be in time or dollars. Again, we discussed tabletop exercises can sometimes fall in recover or prepare. We put it specifically in recover here because some organizations have done one in the past, but they don't do them often, and they don't do them after they've suffered an incident, so they're not learning from those incidents. We do encourage people that you shouldn't wait until after an incident, because the most valuable tabletop exercise you'll ever do is that first one you do before an incident that helps you build those decision trees, those escalation trees, and just determining who is needed to make the decisions and what decisions are made for each role and responsibility ahead of time, so that when the disruption inevitably hits your organization, you already have a fully fleshed out plan that's ready to execute. And if your last tabletop was before the AI era, then your last tabletop was in a completely different threat environment than today. This is also where we see the need for people to look beyond, do I have a disaster recovery plan, to when's the last time that I tested it? Because if you don't have a tested DR plan, then what you really have is a rumor of a DR plan. Executive crisis communication plan, you have to know who's going to call the press, who's going to talk to the parents if you're a K through 12, who's going to talk to the city manager, who's going to talk to the superintendent, who's going to talk to the CEO. The discussions need to be made and documented before an incident response occurs. Often, these are things that come out of the tabletop exercise. These are all related. Post-compromise support engagement. It's important to identify organizations or incident response firms, or even from your cyber insurance standpoint, when we talk about cyber insurance coordination, what's required for me to file a claim? Who can I engage with if I need incident response or digital forensics help? Who can I ask for additional help staffing because I need to re-image all of my machines after a ransomware outbreak? We need to have those relationships identified and in place so that we are able to respond quickly in the event of the disruption. Going along the same lines that we discussed with disaster recovery, backups, we can't just check if the backups ran. We need to restore those to isolated environments and confirm that the data is actually usable, so we know that our backups are solid and that we are actually able to restore and use the data that's restored from them. This also helps us keep an idea of what our RTO recovery time objectives and RPO recovery point objectives are. So how fast can we recover from an outage and how much data do we lose? Those are all important decision points that we need to be able to plan adequately for disruption. I've seen entire recovery efforts stall or fail because they thought they had backups, but when they tried to restore from them, they didn't work. I've also seen months-long delays in forensics because the cyber insurance firm was never asked to provide the process to file the claim, or legal agreements were never put in place for actually leveraging a digital forensics firm. Operationalization isn't just in your technical controls, it's also through the review, testing, and validation of your policies and plans. This makes sure that not only are our tools working, our controls are working, but we also know how to effectively leverage them and invoke things like our cyber insurance. It helps us be prepared to aid our response and recovery efforts in a timely manner. This breaks down ultimately into 3 simplified maturity levels in practice. Starting out, progressing, and operating. Most clients can locate themselves on this slide within a couple of seconds. Starting out is where we have our foundational control deployments, multi-factor authentication, backups, security awareness training, and we have a basic next generation firewall. Progressing is where we get into the beginnings of operationalization. We have a managed SOC. We've tuned our EDR platform. We have people looking at it. We've completed the tabletop exercises, and we're working on getting ongoing patch management and vulnerability scanning going. Operating is where we move into that full operationalization layer, and we're adding in continuous improvement. So we're adding in that life cycle. That's where we get into things like vCISO, strategic leadership assistance, or fractional CISO, getting into metrics-driven measurable decisions, backing everything with the data that we're getting cycle over cycle. Think about where you'd place your organization on this chart right now. You're welcome to put it in the chat if you'd like, but we'll talk about that later in the collaboration area. When I'm working with clients or having solutions-based conversations with them, these 5 mistakes seem to come up time and time again. None of them seem to be directly about tools. They're typically about decisions the organization is trying to make. We find people buying tools without having the staff or the expertise to support them. We have a SIM, but nobody to tune it. We have EDR, but nobody can triage it. We have the tools, but we don't have the operators. People skip tabletops often until after an incident because they don't see the value in them. The first tabletop's really always the most valuable. It sets the foundation and the core processes and procedures before you actually need it. It's very important to run this before you actually need it. Treating compliance as the goal. Compliance is a floor, it's not a ceiling. The auditors are just checking the controls, and they're checking if you can meet those controls. They're not checking for actual gaps in your organization. The 2 lists overlap a lot less than you would think. Neglecting the actual testing of your backups. As I discussed previously, a backup you've never restored to and tested is just a hope, it's not a control. Assuming your firewall is enough. Firewalls haven't been enough since the early 2000s. Even next generation firewalls today are not fully enough. The perimeter is where your users are. It's everywhere. It's not just in your controlled buildings or your controlled network perimeters. Every one of these mistakes we've discussed, I've seen cost a client real time and real money. The good news is each one of them is fixable, and most of them don't require any net new purchase of tools. So this is where we get into where MGT can actually help. We stop talking about the problem. We start talking about what do we actually do to solve this. So there's 2 tracks that you can take here: technology, tools-based, or services. Most clients need a little bit of both. When we're talking technology, we're talking the actual tools: immutable backups, multi-factor authentication, email security, endpoint detection and response, next generation firewalls. These are all tools that may be needed if you don't have them today in your organization. By design, MGT functions in a multi-vendor environment. We pick the best fit for your organization, not the best fit for us to sell you. Services. This is where we typically see the greatest return on investment due to the proper operationalization of those controls. At MGT, we're more about the people and processes than we are about the tools. Tabletop exercises, again, a great place to start. Scenario driven, they pressure test your plans against the threats you're actually like to face, not just a generic ransomware compliance checklist. Assessments and penetration testing. These are actual maturity assessments or penetration testing to determine the actual policy or actual technological gaps in your environment that make you vulnerable to attack. It also helps you prioritize where your posture is as a baseline and where it needs to be over the next 6, 12, 18 months. vCISO or fractional CISO, this is security leadership on demand. A lot of clients don't staff a full-time CISO, but this is where clients need who need that executive level program ownership can consume that without having to add the full-time headcount. Manage SOC and MXDR. This is that 24/7, 365 monitoring. This is someone looking at your environment every day, all day, seeing the events and alerts and incidents as they come in and providing you that tuning and that threat correlation. It's the operationalization layer for everything in the foundation. And then finally, security awareness training. We can't stress enough. Users are always going to be a vulnerability to an organization. And what they require is more education. They need real world testing that's role based and it's measurable so we can see their improvement over time and increase the sophistication of their training over time. Every one of these services is designed to move a tile from the deployed state to the operationalized state. Couple of numbers I'd like you to remember. 86% reduction in phishing susceptibility with the awareness training that we typically recommend from MGT. 30% time savings from Empowered XDR's automated security alerts and human-led response. This is our managed SOC and XDR solution. XDR is just extended detection and response. It extends beyond just the endpoint. 70 to 85% SOC workload reduction using our XDR solution. We're seeing organizations saving a lot of overhead time by using our SOC as a co-partner to actually drive the initial analysis, triage, automation of the alerts and events that they have coming in. Currently, we have over 500,000 managed security endpoints across SLED and enterprise in our organization. That's threat intelligence, that's expertise that we can share across all of our clients base in an anonymized way to make sure that we're always adding the security we're learning about from other organizations into yours. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nikhil Patak to go through our client use cases.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, all. I would like to talk a little bit about the recent breaches that happen across different sectors, because as of now, this is not a specific SLED or a healthcare only problem. It's across all domains and it's everywhere. So with that in mind, I'd like to touch base on a few major breaches that happened recently across different domains. If you look on the slide, we have the recent SLED attack that happened for Instructure Canvas incident, which in approximately 8,800 institutions were impacted and 275 million individuals were potentially impacted on a global scale. So this kind of highlights the growing cybersecurity risks associated with centralized SaaS platforms in education environments and the importance of third-party risk management and cloud security monitoring as well. On a healthcare standpoint, what we've seen in February 2024 was a Change Healthcare breach, which was one of the largest cyber incidents to date, impacting roughly 190 million records with an estimation of $2.45 billion in operational and financial impact, emphasizing the need for stronger identity security, segmentation, and incident response preparedness, like we were talking about. And then from a commercial standpoint, we've seen the Snowflake tenant cascade attacks in 2024. In this case, this was a multiple organization, including Ticketmaster and AT&T, which were impacted because of this credential-based attack on the Snowflake tenant. And this one as well impacted 165 organizations and over 500 million individuals. These numbers keep getting bigger and bigger, which kind of pushes back into understanding and reinforcing the importance of it be MFA or identity governance, cloud monitoring, MXDR, SOC services, multiple things. And then from a OT perspective, we've seen the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in 2021, which led to a 4.4 million ransom and causing significant regional fuel disruptions, and which in turn impacted the national operations and business continuity. So these examples show how the breaches are moving across different domains as opposed to being specific to one individual domain or an industry. So it's across everything now, and the impact that has caused shows us the immediate measure that we need to take to protect them. Now, I'd like to talk about a few real-world cybersecurity engagements that MGT has performed. which will help and demonstrate how organizations currently are evolving from reactive security operations to proactive and continuously managed cyber resilience. First, I'd like to talk about City of Rialto. The city approached us looking for a comprehensive understanding of their cyber risk posture. Now, like many municipalities and cities, they had a combination of legacy infrastructure, segmented operational environments, remote access dependencies, and obviously the increasing concerns around the ransomware exposure. So with that in mind, our engagement primarily focused on reviewing their environment from a holistic standpoint, performing enterprise vulnerability assessments, external and internal penetration testing, and once that is completed, performing a remediation roadmap and executive reporting. With that, the deliverables that we gave them were technical findings for their engineering teams to work on, and then executive leadership level summaries, and then remediation sequencing for recommendations, which is the most crucial part, which will help the client from a remediation perspective to avoid these type of loopholes in the future. And the other important thing that we provided was a risk scoring that was aligned to their operational impact. And the next one would be City of Santa Rosa, which was slightly similar to City of Rialto as well. However, they had a few visibility gaps in the environment, and there were inconsistent patching standards, shadow IT exposure, and their increased attack surface complexity, which was causing an issue to them. So they reached out to us to see if we could perform like an assessment or a review and give them a detailed report on that. So we did that, and we were able to give them a detailed remediation matrices report and some tactical engineering recommendations with security observations and the 3 to 5 year strategic roadmap guidance as well. Now, one thing we emphasized in these two cases was when we talk about vulnerability assessment and pen testing, one thing we need to keep in mind is a penetration test always is not just to see about who's able to get into the network. It's about understanding what an attacker can do once they get into the environment. That becomes more crucial. So we were able to talk the client into that, and they were able to make some changes in the environment to increase the security from an overall perspective. The next one I would like to talk about is a case to 12, Dallas ISD. This was slightly different from the first and the second one. The issue with Dallas ISD was they bought a SIM solution off the shelf, which wasn't tuned, and which was causing situations like alert fatigues, SIM notification overload. SIM was sending tons of notifications. Nobody was able to tune them. So they were not able to identify which was a false positive, which alert was a true positive. And that caused inability to maintain continuous monitoring internally, and then staffing sustainability because of that became a problem for them. So we went in and helped them with our customized SIM platform to quickly secure their environment. And our MXDR offering, which works with our SIM, our 24/7 SOC on top of our source solution, gives them a perfect output that they were looking for from an operationalization perspective. So the deliverables that Dallas ISD was able to achieve with this was they were able to predict their operational costs, and they had access to specialized expertise within MGT, along with the continuous monitoring that was happening 24/7, 365 across the environment, and scalable security operations. If they were to add let's say a few additional schools within the ISD, we were able to scale that because the whole environment was operationalized, and that in turn reduced internal staffing pressure for them, and they were able to use us for multiple other things as well. And the next client I would like to talk about is City of Lawrenceville. With City of Lawrenceville, we were involved with City of Lawrenceville when they had a breach because of a firewall misconfiguration back in 2019. And we were called in for an immediate remediation, which we performed. We performed an immediate containment. And then after that, we performed the infrastructure remediation. We upgraded the firewalls, updated the patches and codes on their devices, and talked and worked with the client to move them towards security modernization from a strategic roadmap that we created for them back in 2019, 2020. That was a 3 to 5 year map. And cut that, today we have 24/7 MDR monitoring with the client. They have ongoing penetration testings, monthly vulnerability scans, and the reporting that we were talking about, and managed network services. And then the most important thing is the ongoing security policy development and review as well, which keeps you abreast of current situations in the industry, and they can make the changes internally as needed when those reports are delivered. So with that, they have a continuous operational oversight of the environment, and we make sure that the environment is holistically secure. So these are some of the clients that I would like to talk about. And with that, the bottom line would be, to summarize what we talked about and what Chris talked about, is we need to identify and operationalize the highest impact for security investments that you're making from a security standpoint. And we would like you to leverage MGT that brings 35 years of experience and over 200 engineers and cybersecurity experts with a 24/7 365 SOC. And also we are ISO 27000 to 27002 certified, which gives the importance of how we treat security and how important it is for us on a day-to-day basis. So please feel free to reach out to the account managers or solutions architects, and we can have a quick walkthrough about the security quadrant that Chris just talked about. And we can give you, and we can work on the next steps as needed.